Greetings and welcome to the Center for Global Development's event on harnessing digital transformation for good. I'm Sanjeev Gupta, Senior Fellow Emeritus at the Center, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So we'll be discussing the Asian Development Bank's latest Asian Development Policy Report, which explores how digital transformation can be harnessed to promote inclusive and sustainable development across developing Asia. We know that governments are increasingly adopting digital technologies, and this is fundamentally reshaping how policies are designed and implemented. Digitalization has enabled governments to collect and process economic data at low cost. With a decline in data storage costs and expansion of computing power, governments can now monitor and record a broad range of public interactions, enabling more informed, timely, and responsible policymaking. Notably, the widespread use of mobile phones has extended the reach of digital services to remote and underserved communities in developing countries. Digital tools have also opened new opportunities for improving the delivery of essential government functions, such as revenue collection, public service provision, social program administration. For example, digital payment systems reduce administrative costs and enhance the efficiency of government transfers, an important benefit for countries striving to mobilize resources to fund the Sustainable Development Goals and financing climate-related transitions. So emerging technologies are also playing a growing role in strengthening climate resilience. Early warning systems powered by artificial intelligence and big data enable faster responses to floods, typhoons, and droughts. Geographical information systems support climate policy and disaster preparedness across the region. Tax administration is another area where digital technologies are yielding substantial gains. In nearly all developing countries, electronic filing has made the process easier and more cost-effective for both taxpayers and governments. Of course, digital technologies are not panacea. Political, institutional, human capacity constraints can impede innovation and adoption of digital solutions. Digital systems can be undermined by corruption or non-compliance. Concerns related to cybersecurity, privacy, and fraud are also growing. And while there is often a talk of developing countries leapfrogging through digital solutions, this potential will remain limited so long as large segments of the population lack access to digital world. There are also broader challenges of whether developing countries have the fiscal and energy resources to invest in data infrastructure, such as data centers, and ensure they are powered by clean energy. The ADP report underscores the promise of digital technologies in reducing inequality, empowering marginalized groups, and advancing environmental sustainability. These are among the most urgent development challenges facing the region today, and we will explore them further during our discussion. To begin, I would like to invite Dongkyun Park, advisor at the Asian Development Bank and one of the co-authors of the report, to present the key findings of the Asian Development Policy Report. Following his presentation, I'll open the floor to a panel for a broader discussion. Dongyu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sanjeev, and thank you, Center for Global Development, for kindly hosting this event. Let me now present the Asian Development Policy Report 2025 on harnessing digital transformation for good. Can we play the slides, please? Shannon, can you play the slides, please? Uh, okay, there are some minor technical issues, so please okay, here we go. Thank you very much. So this year's Asian Development Policy Report, an annual flagship publication of the Asian Development Bank, which explores a developmental challenge facing the region, explores the issue of how developing Asia can harness digital transformation for good. Next slide, please. So I would like to start by pointing out the 5 key messages from this year's Asian Development Policy Report. First of all, rapid digital progress is creating a lot of new opportunities for development that is environmentally sustainable and that benefits the broader population and also helps to reduce poverty. But despite such enormous promise to do good, unless digital transformation is managed carefully, it could in fact exacerbate inequality and also undermine sustainability. What that means is that government policies or public policies are vital for addressing the various market failures and equity failures, for example, the digital divide associated with digital transformation. And on a more positive note, to enable, to unleash the innovation that digital transformation makes possible for environmentally sustainable development that benefits the entire population. So what is needed to make this happen are digital policies that explicitly incorporate sustainability goals as well as goals to reduce poverty and improve and thus reduce inequality, and thereby harnessing digital transformation for prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future. But these policies, of course, have to be tailored to country-specific circumstances because Asia is a very heterogeneous region. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the development that benefits everybody is still very much a work in progress, although the region has made a great deal of progress in reducing poverty. And the region also remains highly vulnerable to extreme weather events. For example, if you look at the left-hand side, 19% of the population is still poor today if we use the widely used $3.65 a day threshold for lower middle income countries. Furthermore, as you can also see, Gini coefficient, a widely used measure of inequality, has not improved much. And if you look at the right-hand side, vulnerability to extreme weather shocks, by 2070, under high-end greenhouse gas emission scenarios, the region stands to lose 17% of its GDP. Furthermore, by 2070, 110 million people may be affected by river flooding. Next slide, please. So exactly how can digital technology promote sustainable development that benefits the broader population? Well, here are the 5 specific channels through which digital technology can promote broader development goals of the region. One is by enhancing, if you look at the top right, enhancing access to information and services. Second is strengthen disaster monitoring and disaster response by providing granular data about weather movements. Thirdly, digital technology can foster innovative and scale solutions which can help create new businesses and also empower and enable entrepreneurship and small and medium enterprises. And next, digital technology can improve productivity and efficiency. That, of course, leads to economic growth and innovation and business expansion. And last but not least, digital technology can also nudge behavioral responses. toward more responsible behavior, environmentally responsible behavior. Next slide, please. But if not managed well, digital transformation could exacerbate inequality and compromise sustainability. So if you look at the top right, the well-known issue of digital divide, which refers to disparity in access, use, and outcome of digital technology. And also digital technology can also lead to complex job market impacts. It can replace work, replace jobs, but create new ones. And then, of course, weak digital governance can create issues such as cybersecurity, data privacy, and misinformation, as well as issues with market competition. And last but not least, there's uncertain impact on energy consumption and emission. There are energy efficiency gains due to use of digital technology, but that may lead to expanded energy consumption, which will lead to higher emissions. Next slide, please. So as you can see in this chart, digital technology, digital transformation is progressing rapidly throughout the region. Next slide, please. But there are still large gaps in terms of digital infrastructure as well as digital skills. Next slide, please. Furthermore, digital technologies do not reach all Asians. For example, rural internet download speed is significantly slower than urban internet download speed, as you can see on the left diagram. And of course, Asian economies vary a lot in terms of digital inclusion, especially digital affordability. Next slide, please. And digitalization narrows income inequality and enables SMEs by enhancing economic opportunities as well as innovative solutions. Of course, our report is supported by new, fresh, rigorous empirical research. And one good example is the figure you see on the left, which shows from one of our background papers that digitalization it's based on data from Chinese cities. Digitalization has a significantly greater impact on the income of the poorest 10%, as you can see in the figure P10, compared to the richest 10%, as you can see in the figure P90, and that in turn helps to reduce income inequality. Next slide, please. And by the similar token, digital technology can also promote a cleaner environment and also strengthen disaster risk management. If you see on the left-hand side, data from publicly listed Chinese companies shows that an increase in digitalization level leads to a significant and positive increase in environmental scores. And if you see on the right-hand side, digital technology, such as remote sensing, when it is combined with socio-economic data, can inform us about potential agricultural damage during tropical cyclones in Fiji, which of course helps to speed up disaster response. Next slide, please. So how is the region doing? Well, NRI, or Network Readiness Index, that is a measure of digitalization. If you look at this table, green means improve relative to the rest of the world, relative to the global mean. So if you look at digitalization between 2020 and 2024, the region is doing better, is improving relative to the rest of the world. But how about in terms of inclusion? And here we use the overall inclusive growth index developed by UNCTAD, United Nations Commission for Trade and Development. The picture is quite mixed, right? Some are improving green, but many are moving backward, orange, and some are remaining the same, yellow. And if you look at the Environmental Performance Index, or EPI, the picture is even even more pessimistic, because it shows most Asian countries regressing or falling back relative to the rest of the world. So what does this mean? Digital transformation is moving full steam ahead, right? As you can see, most countries are improving. But at the same time, we do face challenges in terms of environmentally sustainable development, as well as development that benefits the broader population. So the obvious implication is that the region must use, could and should harness digital transformation, digital technology to make further progress in terms of environmental sustainability, as well as development that benefits everyone. Next slide, please. So what is needed is an overarching national digital strategy, and then supporting that should be inclusion and sustainability aligned digital policies tailored to domestic circumstances, as well as engaging a broad range of stakeholders, private sector, households, civil society, local and international communities. Next slide, please. And then what are some policy instruments that countries can use to align their digital policy with their goals for environmental sustainability and development that benefits everyone, that the broader population? Regulations and standards. Some examples are given: subsidies and tax incentives, capacity building and skill upgrading schemes, and also use of market mechanism. And last but not least, collaboration with key stakeholders such as private sector, household, civil society, and international community. Next slide, please. So last but not least, we understand that we cannot pursue a one-size-fits-all policy package, and the right policy mix will depend on country circumstances. So we divided Asia's countries as follows. We separated in terms of how they do in terms of inclusion and sustainability, and also how they do in terms of digitalization. So countries such as Bangladesh, Cambodia, Kyrgyz Republic, and others are low inclusion and sustainability, as well as low digitalization countries, LL countries, on the other, or LD countries. On the other hand, HH countries, countries that do well on both dimensions, and HL countries, which cover most of Asia in terms of population and includes PRC, China, and India, and Indonesia, are countries that have high digitalization, but can do much better in terms of inclusion and sustainability. And these are some of the policy recommendations specific to each group. For example, for LD countries, the low countries, of course, one key challenge, one key policy priorities is to speed up digital transformation by investing more in digital infrastructure and skills, which they currently lag behind in. Next slide, please. Okay, that concludes my presentation. And again, thank you to CGD for giving us this opportunity to present Asian Development Policy Report 2025 on harnessing digital transformation for good. Back to you, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Dong-Yung, for your very helpful presentation summarizing the key messages from your policy paper. Before going any further, I think I would like to introduce our distinguished panel to the audience. Edward Orton is an assistant professor at George Mason University in Northern Virginia, USA. Ravina Cullen is a emeritus professor in Information Management University of Wellington, New Zealand. Jung-Gon Kim leads research on sustainable development at Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, Seoul. And Mansi Kheda is a senior fellow at Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi, India. So let me start by asking sort of a general question from Edward. You've heard Dong-Hyu talk about the progress that is being made in developing Asia, but in general terms, how should developing countries go about expanding digital transformation? Are there any specific challenges that these countries face which are different from advanced economies? And you recall that I also talked about these expectations about leapfrogging, which is in some sense related to the questions I'm raising to you. Over to you, Edward.
Thanks, Sanjeev. So I think there are three key components here to help boost digital transformation and kind of identifying them then helps us work out what we can do to kind of foster this process. So I think the key thing firstly is recognizing on the supply side that we need to provide good quality digital infrastructure, so a decent broadband connectivity, a decent broadband service to everyone. Secondly, I then think there's a range of demand side factors. So people need to be able to adopt devices. They need to find content online that's within the language which they understand. They need to have the skills and literacy to access that information, and they need to be able to afford the device. There's a whole range of challenges which we're facing there. And then thirdly, I think the important aspect is the policy and regulatory framework, and it affects these first two factors quite substantially. And I'm sure we could speak for the next hour just on this dimension alone. But basically, we want to create a framework that fosters infrastructure deployment, okay, on the supply side. So that's a conducive fiscal framework that's making sure that we have good quality regulation to boost coverage to unviable areas. And then on the demand side, I think there's lots of policy dimensions there. Obviously, we need to make sure people are getting upskilled to use these technologies, both consumers and businesses, but also making sure, again, that the fiscal landscape is favorable to people actually adopting these technologies. Okay, they're merit goods. We want people to adopt them. We don't want to place too many consumer taxes on, mobile access, essentially, or access via other digital technologies. Mobile might just be one of the cheapest ways for us to deploy this across a wide area. So they're the three dimensions that I think are really important to kind of boost this digital transformation process. Now, the second point you raised is, are there any differences with high-income countries versus low and middle-income countries? And of course there are. I think the key issue here is actually trying to deploy the infrastructure in areas where people might only be topping up, $1 or $2 a week, essentially. And that's really not very much to try to deliver like a decent internet service. And that has key issues with how we deploy that. It can also affect the ability for people to buy the handset, businesses to then be able to deploy these services to consumers to take up. So fostering that digital transformation process. Leapfrogging is an interesting one. Obviously, we saw a lot of this during the 2G era, where low income, often middle income countries as well, without any fixed infrastructure, they were able to do fantastic things with just basic SMS text messaging. And I think there's actually a lot of scope there. So when I say a decent broadband service, even if it's just 0.5 megabit per second, 1 megabit per second, really small amounts, you can do an awful lot of this that goes beyond what we were doing, 10 years ago with SMS, basically. And that's still the cutting edge in many really hard to reach areas, especially in lower middle income countries. So making sure that we can deliver those services, can enable people to do fantastic things. What people do with that in terms of digital transformation is going to be entirely dependent on the local context. So one service might be deployed differently in a different country to another. So just making sure there's good quality broadband connectivity in those locations for people to access and work out what they can do with it is a really important first step. So I'll leave it there unless there's any follow-up questions. Thank you.
To some of the points that you've raised in the subsequent discussion. Ravina, if I might turn to you. I'm sorry that it's really midnight for you now in New Zealand, but thank you for bearing with us. The panel is spread all across the world, so it's a bit hard for you. But thanks a lot for taking the time. So what are the benefits of digitalization for lower income population groups and for the local and national economies? And we heard Edward talk about the supply side, basically saying the government should be investing in infrastructure. Why should countries invest in this digital infrastructure? What are the costs and benefits of that investment?
Well, I'd like to answer that question firstly by referring to a few general points that emerge from the evidence of the literature, both economic and social science studies, and then perhaps talk about a few on-the-ground scenarios. And I'd like to refer first to a point made by Alex Echiampong in a research paper co-written with Dong Yong Park and Shu Tian, as a background paper for Harnessing Digital Transformation for Good report. In his paper entitled Digital Accessibility and Poverty Reduction, noted through a very robust economic analysis that digital technologies comprising broadband, telephone, mobile and internet access contributes to poverty reduction at all levels in society, but that impact is not even across all levels. So that means that the very poorest, the most disadvantaged, need extra support in order to gain the benefits of digitalization. And it also means that at the macro level, developing countries need government interventions also to enjoy the benefits of digitalization that developed countries enjoy. And one of the key points I'd like to focus on is that within this context, there's significant groups which one can identify that can enjoy immediate benefits from digitalization in terms of income, access to government services, and that alongside these benefits to the individual, this activity really contributes to economic growth in the local economy, the regional economy, and the national economy. And such groups would include agricultural workers, especially in remote areas, would include women, ethnic and religious minorities, and people with disabilities. All of these groups form a pool of unutilized talent, people who do not enjoy their full share of human rights. But moving forward, I'd like to focus on women. And there's a considerable literature on gender inequality, and a considerable amount of it focuses on the negative impact of gender discrimination on economic growth. So aside from the human rights issue, gender inequality means that half the population are not able to fully contribute to the economy. Now, which country can afford this? Why would governments not want to address the situation? And digital technology is one of the most effective tools for the empowerment of women, enabling them to have better access to employment, education, knowledge, government agencies and support, health services, management of their fertility, and financial services. And it's been clearly demonstrated through global research that when women have greater access to education, employment, and financial services that digital technologies can bring, they are empowered in the domestic situation, in the home. They're more able to bargain for their children's education and health issues. They have higher rates of saving, use credit services better. They're able to set up small enterprises based on agricultural produce or local crafts to bring in further income. And one of the studies cited in the ADP report shows that rural women are more able to secure off-farm employment in the agricultural sector. So reducing gender inequality is not only contributing to equality, it's also a major sustainable development goal, and technology can help deliver this. And there are examples across member states in the ADB in Southeast Asia and across the Pacific that show that the use of mobile technology, that's SMS texting and so on, mobile financial services, usually referred to as fintech, has brought many benefits to the agricultural sector in small island development states, but also in remote landlocked areas. For example, farmers can access market prices and go past the middleman and excessive charges and levies, and to get the best price that they can for return on their produce. They can identify new markets. They can access knowledge from science about new techniques, seeds, stock, and potential threats such as disease and climate-based threats. And fintech means prompter payments and easier access to loans. So there's an economic benefit to the individual, but also to the local economy and ultimately to the national economy. Moreover, women can access credit through fintech that they've not been able to do in the past, and some women set up small businesses in the village. And in the Pacific alone, through my own research, I found that some other technologies can enhance biosecurity procedures in Fiji. For example, Fiji could be in constant contact with New Zealand about some new disease they'd discovered or some anomaly that they needed expert advice on. Or in Vanuatu, the certification of organic produce, which gave them a better market, a higher price for their produce. They could they could verify through enhanced digital communication. So all these innovations have personal benefits as well as building the local economy. In the urban setting, by contrast, fintech has brought advanced access to financial services to a large community of unbanked communities amongst the urban poor. And this has brought some of these same benefits, but it's also had other specific innovations that can be used in urban territories, involving smart cities, which bring benefits to the urban population, such as less traffic congestion, planning travel across town, congestion and pollution, and increased access to employment opportunities and advanced warning of hazards, largely through climate change, impacts of storms and so on. But there are other innovations which are helping disadvantaged communities. One example being a project to define and grant land rights to over 1 million people living in slum areas in India's Odisha state, where drones and handheld apps are used to map and assign title to land in the slums. Now, this gives slum dwellers a formal address which is needed to open a bank account, to enroll their children in school. The scheme also enables more targeted government services and increased collection of revenue. So, in fact, the use and benefits of technologies to manage, register, and remotely search for land titles has been seen across the whole of Asia and the Pacific, and is quite a notable economic benefit for the individuals concerned and for governments. And there are many cases across the Pacific where I was able to talk to people who were involved in creating land registers and identifying land rights, which had previously been challenged by exploitative technology entrepreneurs. So digitization also significantly improves more timely access to government services. In many cases, a dramatic reduction in the time needed off work to submit an application, comply with regulations, register or license property or machinery, or even, and I was really interested to note when I first started teaching digital government and e-government at Victoria, my Indian students told me that the ability to book a ticket online reduced the time it took to purchase their interstate rail ticket from 2 to 3 days to about half an hour. What a saving for the bulk of the population. What a contribution to the economy. So we should also note that the digitalization of interactions between governments and citizens massively reduces opportunities for graft and corruption, especially in tendering processes. And just to conclude, I'd like to give one final example of interest to those watching this presentation, seen across Asia and the Pacific, and that's the use of mobile technologies to support midwives and health workers working in remote areas or slums. So not only does this give them access to expert assistance just on their mobile phone, but in addition, in many places, they can be given official status to register births and deaths. And 35% of the babies born in the world are not registered at birth at this time. And this can prevent them as they grow up from accessing citizenship, education, voting rights, land ownership. So this simple mobile-based innovation is hugely transformational. So there are some examples. There are some reasons. I hope they're persuasive enough for governments to understand that this is a needy, much needed and much very beneficial intervention.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravina, for a very elaborate response to the question I raised, and you touched upon how digital technologies have impacted on participation rates by women in the labor force, how it has improved the access to health facilities, to financial markets, and so on and so forth. But we saw in this one of these slides that Dong-Hyun presented that the excess or the extent of digital technologies in developing Asia varies a lot. So one question that came to my mind, and I don't want to raise with you, but maybe somebody in the panel can can answer it, or in the next round we can go on to it. To what extent this has made a difference to productivity growth in these countries? Are there any studies which show how the productivity growth rates have varied depending on extent of adoption of digital technologies? But we can go back to this issue later on. But let me now go to Jong Kim. And so my question to you, since you've been focusing on the cross-border issues relating to digital technologies, and so what are the challenges that you see that arise in international cooperation that would allow developing countries to benefit from digital technologies, including adoption of green digital technology?
Yes, thank you, Sanjeev. We have witnessed numerous examples that countries have utilized digital technology to achieve inclusive growth and economic transformation. As you mentioned, this trend is visible in developing countries where traditional barriers to growth can be bypassed through digital technologies. The spread of mobile-based digital finance is perhaps the most representative example, and e-commerce has also greatly contributed to grassroots companies seizing new opportunities. Yet, despite many success stories, significant challenges remain in how digital technologies is being utilized. In general, international cooperation should address dimensions such as infrastructure gaps, such as reliable electricity, broadband connectivity, and cloud capacity, and so on. And then institutional capacity, which means the capacity to design, manage, and sustain digital projects, and policy and regulatory frameworks, such as data protection, and finance mechanisms, of course, and social trust and inclusion, which means technologies must be accessible to marginalized groups and built on transparency and citizen participation. And let me focus on the public sector's digitalization. Many countries are still in the early stages of digitalizing their government services. Take India as a case in point, where I visited last year for my research. The Indian government is now taking notable steps through the National Urban Digital Mission, which aims to, as far as I know, digitize 14 types of public services, such as taxation, water supply, and rent registration across all states. Additionally, integrated urban control centers are being established to manage transportation, electricity, water resources, disaster response more effectively. I think integrating green digital technologies is essential for the public services, such as smart grids, AI-driven resource optimization, satellite monitoring for agriculture and forestry, and energy-efficient urban systems. These technologies hold tremendous potential to support energy transition and climate adaptation. However, the situation is, as Dr. Park mentioned, often complicated. Smart grid, IoT sensors, AI computing, and data centers operations paradoxically become a factor that increases carbon emissions. For many countries, the most pressing question is not how green is the energy they use, but rather can they access reliable and affordable energy. In this sense, international cooperation should focus on ensuring energy systems can support the increased demand generated by digital technologies. International partners, including development banks, donor agencies, multinational tech firms, must collaborate with governments to invest in energy resilient digital infrastructure. Moreover, I want to stress that digital technology adoption is also about readiness and capacity. Many developing countries lack skilled professionals in areas such as data management, cybersecurity, or software engineering. They may also face policy bottlenecks, legal ambiguity, or institutional fragmentation. Based on Korea's experience, in case of public digital transformation, it is not only about tools and platforms. It also involves institutional reform, capacity building, and citizen engagement. In sum, international approach to promote digital development must take a holistic, demand-tailored approach that aligns with each country's conditions. In particular, public sector's digitalization requires more than funding. It demands technical expertise, operational know-how, training systems, and long-term engagement strategies. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Jung-Gon, for elaborating on the question I raised. And we'll come back to some of the issues you raised. But let me now turn to Mansi. You've heard previous speakers talk about the spread of digital technologies in India. I myself spend some time every year in India, so I've seen how widespread the use is. So could you explain to the audience here what is unique about India's digital public infrastructure approach? And is it possible for other countries to emulate it? At least during the G20 meetings, there was a push for other countries to also adopt India's model. And are there any countries which are doing so?
Yes, Sanjeev. And thank you, CGD and ADB, for making me a part of this panel. Well, the digital public infrastructure approach that India has adopted towards its digital transformation is a classic combination of bringing together public sector capabilities by investing in infrastructure and bringing together private sector innovation. So the way we still don't have a definition for digital public infrastructure. It's debated, but what everyone who understands digital public infrastructure at least knows that there are certain principles using which you identify digital public infrastructure. And those technical design features are essentially technologies that are interoperable, technologies that are made using open source software, open source standards, open source data to the extent possible, technologies that allow for private sector innovation, technologies that are modular and minimalistic in design, and technologies that can be scaled to population scale. Now, with these design features come normative ideas of making technologies that are inclusive, that are secure by design, that follow privacy by design, and so on and so forth. With this sort of a model, what India has been able to do, and the impact studies are still underway, but based on the evidence that we have, India has been able to leapfrog, and this word has been used several times today, but the idea of leapfrogging its digital transformation and bringing in a lot of the people who were initially excluded from the digital ecosystem and the welfare ecosystem and public services ecosystem into its net. The digital ID system, which is Aadhaar, is very well now known to have been able to fix India's direct benefit transfer schemes. There are hundreds of schemes that have been integrated. There are estimates by the government on how many ghost beneficiaries and how much deduplication has happened, fiscal savings to the government. And there are multiple DPIs that the government has now built in the real payment space, in the data exchange space. Somebody mentioned the National Urban Digital Mission, which is also being built on the principles of DPI, using interoperable ecosystems that talk to each other, to let municipalities talk to each other, to let different municipalities within a state talk to each other for enhancement requirements of fiscal revenue for financial management, etc., etc. So there are tons of examples, but I think what has been very unique about using this sort of approach has been to try and be frugal and address challenges that are unique to a developing country like India. Whether it works in other countries, sure, it does. And it's not as if like other countries were not using these principles. Estonia's X-Road is obviously well known to everyone who talks about digital transformation. The X-Road was launched in 2001. That was almost a decade before India had started thinking about its digital identity program. But I think it was India that brought to the world the idea that was a third approach to digitalization, something that developing countries had not recognized as was possible to build population scale technologies for large developing countries that were resource constrained, let the public sector do its job and let the private sector build on top of it. And because of which there is a lot of debate on the word public within digital public infrastructure. What is the public? Is it government ownership? Is it because the technology that is the underlying technology is a digital public good, or is it in economics terms, is it are these public goods that are that are non exhaustible and non usable? So those are lots of discussions happening, but I think we need to keep in mind that what digital public infrastructure in a very practicable sense for people to understand it is now just three things. One is a foundational digital identity program, a fast payment system, and data exchange capabilities with qualities of interoperability, modularity, minimal design, and ability to scale to population levels. There is a lot of effort that has been made in trying to take these technologies not only to other developing countries, but also to developed countries. But I don't think that the idea is that everyone should replicate India's model, but to pick from the India model whatever works for them, because these technologies have to be designed in the local context and have to be aligned to the policy choices that the governments of other countries are taking. And that's where the modularity of this approach comes into play. So for example, the digital public good, or the DPG, that is underlying Aadhaar, which is our digital identity ecosystem, countries have adopted bits and pieces of it for credential programs. Some have built their full-fledged foundational digital identity programs. You have Morocco do that, you have Philippines do that, Ethiopia. There are several countries that have looked at India's underlying digital public good, which is MOSIP, to build a digital identity program. But it's not as if every digital identity program is Aadhaar. They have been contextualized to what the country needs, and that's how it will work. Another good example is from the payment system. India's real-time payment system, called Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, is institutionalized in a public-private partnership sort of model, where you have a not-for-profit company which is held together by the central bank and the banking association. Whereas in Brazil, it sits inside the central bank itself. The initial starting points, the regulatory needs, the policy choices are also very different. For example, India mandates a zero merchant discount rate on UPI for purposes of scale, while in other countries it may be charged. Similarly, in certain countries, it may be mandatory to use this inter-network system, but in India, it didn't start off as mandatory, and the ecosystem grew organically. So these sort of policy choices, these sort of regulatory choices are very localized. But I think what has become more uniform are the principles using which this digital infrastructure needs to be built, which is to say, allow for open standards, allow for open source software, for higher integration, for more interoperability, so that it is easier to scale these technologies, and not only scale within domestically, it's also to be able to build at some point, where desirable, cross-border. One of the previous speakers was mentioning this, but UPI, as we know, is now integrated across at least a few countries, not only in the neighborhood, but even countries like UAE and France and Singapore, where India has commercial interest. So there's a lot that one can do through this model, but I don't want the audience to take away that everyone should transform or use DPIs in the way India has, but the principles of which are worth considering, not only in developing countries, but even developed countries, I think have a lot to think through in terms of how DPIs or the DPI type approach can be used for digital transformation. Let me stop here.
Very helpful elaboration. Let me turn to now second round of questions from the panel, and here I would suggest that we try to be a little brief because we have another 20 minutes or so before we end the discussion, and so it would be helpful if we try to be a little bit more precise in the responses. So Edward, I'd like to go back to you. And you've been working on these issues across countries. So what are the most suitable strategies that countries can adopt to expand connectivity, particularly in developing countries? And are there any specific options for governments in this regard?
Thanks, Sanjeev. And I have a few options. I think I'll start by kind of breaking them down in terms of the low-cost ones, because obviously, money's tight, raised from taxes, and it's not easy to, or it is easy to spend that, but you want to kind of start with the low-cost options first. So I would say incentivizing infrastructure deployment is really important. So that's making sure that for operators, they can deploy the assets that they want, hopefully in areas where we have borderline viability, and making sure that we can try to reduce those costs. So reusing as much infrastructure in those locations is always a good option. So the specific background paper that I produced for the ADB focused on infrastructure sharing. So this is the idea that perhaps if we can't build a single infrastructure in a specific location, then maybe we can build if we can't build multiple infrastructures, then maybe we can build a single one. And there's actually a lot of benefits there. Okay, so often we might just focus on cost. How do we reduce costs? But actually there's benefits in terms of reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions as well, so we can make the infrastructure more sustainable. Now, I'm not saying that we go off and we build this everywhere, a single infrastructure, a neutral host, but in areas where we're really struggling for viability, it's a serious option which is being looked at and already deployed in various different countries already. So I think that that's an important step forward. Universal service funds are at the more kind of higher end of the spectrum. That costs money. Traditionally, for hard to reach areas where mobile's kind of the key technology, we've attached coverage obligations to spectrum auctions, and that's been reasonably successful because you're able to expose market mechanisms to how we do that. And then just given we're short of time, I think I'll just mention one demand side aspect. So there's two previous points we're focusing on the supply side, how we deploy that infrastructure. On the demand side, digital inclusion programs help because we can boost the demand that's present. If more people see relevance in broadband services, if they start paying for the services, that improves the viability of deploying this infrastructure by boosting the demand side, essentially. So I'll finish there, and thank you all for inviting me to speak at this event.
Thank you, Edward. Ravina, so let me turn to you now. So you already, in your previous question, you talked about how the disadvantaged groups have benefited from the expansion of digital technologies. What kind of policies and actions are needed from governments to do so? And how can one influence the progress in achieving the SDGs through digital technologies?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that it's absolutely critical that a country has a national digital strategy, and looking across those countries which have successful digitalization, those that don't. It's all about policy and how you manage it. That said, I think then you need to think about the demand side. Ed has talked about the supply side and some strategies for making that more successful and to develop universal service and access. But when you come to the demand side, there are barriers, and affordability, once dealt with by those policies he was talking about, is only one of many of the barriers. So the barriers are often things like lack of capacity. And when you think about capacity, that needs to be building the workforce who will support this increased use of technology in villages and rural areas and so on, as well as developing the skills of the people who will use. So you've got two things to think about there, the technicians to support it, mend your phone, and so on. The literacy levels and use of local languages was another barrier. Now, AI can do something about language barriers, but literacy is in itself essential to the uptake of digital services. And that needs to be thought about by governments and their policies, and they need active programs to increase literacy, which may include in the educational curriculum, making sure, just more attention to education gets more people able to use digital resources. Cultural barriers in some countries are one of the strongest deterrents. These include social and religious beliefs, societal bias based on gender, religion, class or caste, differences in values. And then there are people who lack confidence to take on new technologies. It's not been part of their world. They haven't been introduced to the way that people in urban situations are, and also mistrust in government. So how do you get around these barriers? Well, firstly, there is education and training. An educational curriculum needs to ensure that children are exposed to technology in their education, learning digital skills, but also learning critical thinking and ability to assess the quality of information they're looking at, and safety online. That is a huge concern out in rural communities. When you go ask people, would you like to participate in this program and start using digital resources, and they say, no, we don't want anything to do with that, thank you. No, that's very dangerous territory. That has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with by working with communities, giving them strategies to handle the risks of online encounters that the children will have, that they will have. So education and safety online is important for children and adults. And putting suitable programs in place means working with key stakeholders, educational agencies, institutions, religious bodies, and securing funding from telecommunications providers. Some of them are quite willing to put money into villages to make sure that they have an ongoing market there, and cooperating with local and international NGOs and civil society. The actions at the local level might require working with groups which support the advancement of women and girls and showing them what can happen, working with community organisations to help overcome mistrust, and strategies such as identifying successful users, successful programs, people who can champion the digital services and show what they can do with them. All these help overcome these barriers. But overall, long-term commitment from everyone is really critical. It's so distressing to go out into communities and say, well, there was an aid program and there was a computer came along and there was this program and that program, but they went away at the end of the time and now it's just sitting in the corner, it's not used. You've got to make a long-term commitment. You've got to stay with people as they go on this journey. However, the evidence does show that as new technologies become truly accessible and the benefits become clear, people will adopt things that make a difference to their life, like farmers finding out market prices, like women getting extra employment through technology. And I'd just like to finish by commenting that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals recognise the impact of digital transformation on poverty reduction and helping people everywhere live a fulfilling life. So if your country has made a commitment to the SDGs, that means they need to commit to harnessing digital transformation for good. technology is a tool to get to where you want to be in terms of inclusion and reduction of poverty. So thank you for the opportunity to participate both in the project itself and in this forum.
Thank you, Ravina. Let me now turn to Yuan Khan, and I'm going to again go on to the international aspects of digital technologies. So, what are the challenges that you see in international cooperation that will ensure that developing countries can benefit equitably from artificial intelligence? Everybody is talking about it now, and yet, these technologies require huge investments, require abundance of energy, and so what can, from the international perspective, what can the international cooperation can do to ensure that these countries benefit from
Yes,
artificial intelligence?
yes. As you mentioned, AI is becoming a defining issue in the global digital transformation. So recently, I read the AI index report from Stanford University. I found that now optimism is rising about the potential of AI. In particular, the report notes that AI systems have significantly improved in performance over the past few years, while the cost of training and deploying them has dropped dramatically by as much as 70% in some cases. This optimism is especially strong in developing countries. This suggests the strong potential for rapid AI adoption, particularly where scalable, efficient solution is promising, such as agriculture, health, and education. AI is by nature a borderless technology. AI has the potential to help address major cross-border and global challenges. For example, AI-driven models are already being used to predict climate patterns, track disease outbreaks, and support disaster response systems. In sub-Saharan Africa, AI-based diagnostics are enhancing access to healthcare in rural communities. These are, of course, promising signs. On the other hand, AI transcends geographical boundaries in terms of data, algorithms, and platforms. The risk it may pose, such as algorithmic bias, information manipulation, affect all countries and social classes. Moreover, concerns are growing about the uneven distribution of AI benefits among countries. It is projected that the gap in AI capabilities could lead to inequalities in technological development, trade competitiveness, economic growth, and so on, based on some reports from international institutions such as IMF, WTO, World Bank. So these are maybe widely accepted concerns, I think. Against this background, I believe that it is increasingly necessary to treat AI as a global public good. The idea of AI as a global public good has gained momentum in international forums. Last year, UN General Assembly unanimously adopted a resolution calling for AI to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The resolution explicitly emphasized the role of AI in eradicating poverty, improving access to quality education, advancing clean energy, and supporting climate change adaptation. And UN also suggests for the creation of global AI fund, a financing mechanism aimed at helping developing countries build digital infrastructure, strengthen human capital, and develop context-specific AI applications. So AI can fulfill its promise through inclusive, collaborative action. So I think top priorities in international cooperation could include such as building inclusive and resilient digital infrastructure, strengthening human capacity, supporting open data initiatives tailored for local context, establishing global regulatory frameworks with active participation from developing countries, and expanding funding mechanisms such as the Global AI Fund to ensure sustainable and equitable access to AI technologies. In my view, I want to stress that human capacity building is the critical element in the long term. And another important point I would like to stress with urgency is the governance of AI, both domestically and globally. If an effective AI governance framework is not established, negative phenomena such as regulatory or ethics washing may emerge, and it will become increasingly difficult to control the potential harms caused by AI. This highlights the necessity of international cooperation, and countries must actively participate in and contribute to the discussions on global AI governance. Yeah, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mansi, picking up on the same point that was discussed earlier by Jungon, how can developing countries respond to the domination of two key players like the US and China in the area of AI? We've raised that issue before. Some of these developing countries lack enough energy to be able to support that. What are the ways for these countries to deal with this issue, and how is India dealing with it? From what do you see happening in India?
Thank you. I mean, I don't think there are any easy answers because US and China are way ahead of any other country at this point. Even the European so-called developed countries which have had a technological lead are not even close to where US and China are on AI. And it's not only in terms of the research capabilities or the model building, whether it is ownership of infrastructure, compute capacity, the research that they are producing. In the US especially, a lot of research is not only coming out of universities, it's more coming out from the private sector and companies that are producing these models. And finally, also in terms of just the monetization of all of this, the VC funds in 2024, we have almost, I think, 40% plus from some of the data that comes from OECD AI, 40% plus VC investments in AI came to the US. So they are clearly, outliers in terms of where a recent report that we did at ICRIER on the state of India's digital economy, we realized that not only India, but several other developed and developing countries are far below where US and China is. Now, to break this sort of a duopoly is not easy because AI is a resource intensive technology. But the good news is that with DeepSeek and several other innovations that are happening, we realize that the technology is becoming more efficient and we can do a lot more with this technology at lower costs. So in some sense, there is a second mover advantage that countries like India have, where we don't have to go through the pains of investing so much that US and China had to do to build something, and we can build it more efficiently, more cheaper, being more frugal in how we develop these technologies. But the resource constraints still exist. There is investment that needs to be made on the infrastructure side, which is the data centers, the GPUs. There is investment that needs to be made on the talent and the skilling side, and then there's investment that needs to be made on nurturing startups and SMEs. And there's a point that you made right in the beginning about why can't you see all of this in productivity, or where do you see digital transformation in the productivity statistics? And it's true because large scale diffusion hasn't happened, and most of the AI that we see today is more at the consumer level, where we have lots of ChatGPT users. But if you ask the SMEs, how many of them are really using the AI tools in their business, that won't be very high for a country like India. But what is happening, like on the governance side, there's a lot of collaboration that is happening. Dr. Jong spoke about the need for it, and I think countries recognize that there has to be globally coordinated governance responses. But in terms of building capabilities, I think there will be some natural partnerships that will also emerge. There are certain countries that have a better edge over computing and infrastructure capacity, and there are certain others that have more, such as India, that have better talent and research capabilities. I think countries will eventually, should at least partner to be able to deal with this to deal with this duopoly that we have at the moment. And I think another point that I wanted to make was that at some point the infrastructure and the models will get commoditized. I think what we need to do, especially in countries like India, is to be able to utilize our data better. There's a lot of big talk about open data, but the reality is that it is still very half done. There is a lot of data that is available, but is it being used to work on the AI models? India has done a lot of work through Bhashini, which is looking at India's numerous vernacular languages and trying to code models using that, so that there is contextualization in the innovation that is happening around AI in India. So the power, I think the harnessing will happen through the use of locally relevant data, and therefore locally relevant models and innovation. That is one edge that some of the Asian countries will have, in my opinion. But there is still a lot that we need to think about in terms of resources, especially energy resources that you mentioned. There are so many statistics that came out. Sam Altman says that no need to be polite to ChatGPT. Every please and thank you that you say to ChatGPT costs us a lot of energy. The whole Studio Ghibli art duplication that happened on ChatGPT, that the whole thing, and some estimate, if I remember reading correctly, was that one image that was produced was equivalent to 20 minutes of a home light bulb being on. And there's so many more estimates. Data centers, they recently produced the IEA produced a report on AI, and it said that data centers consume 1.5% of the total electricity that is consumed globally. So these are all very resource intensive, especially on the energy side. And we need to be more mindful of how we are digitalizing and how we are using our AI models. And one response has been to make it more and more renewable energy supply, the data centers being supported by renewable energies, to explore the use of nuclear, which again comes with a lot of regulatory challenges, things that have to be thought through. I would say that it's all under process, but the rate of change and innovation is very dynamic. So everything, even developing countries need, like India, they have several policies in place through the India AI mission, where they're looking at compute, they're looking at data, they're looking at use cases, they're looking at talent. But things are happening globally at such a fast pace that keeping up will mean that the countries are on their toes, looking for partnerships, looking at how to use the private sector, looking at how to use the public sector to be able to deal with the US-China duopoly.
We are actually over our time, but we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I would like to throw them out to you guys. And you'll have only 1 minute to respond. So the first question is, how can we fast track investment in digital public infrastructure to support other digital interventions? 1 minute. The person who wants to respond should just raise the hand and I'll ask that person. Mansi.
On the digital public infrastructure side, there's already, there's a lot of foundational, there's a lot of support coming from multilateral development banks and a lot of foundations. The Gates Foundation, for instance, has really put out a huge programmatic support for adoption of digital public infrastructure, both from just the infrastructure spending as well as from the capacity building side. But I think over-reliance on these models, so the governments that cannot afford can perhaps look at the foundational organizations or multilateral development banks for their initial support. But I think alongside, they also need to think about how do they make that financing more sustainable. In other words, think of monetization models. Think of it from a business model point of view, and not just infrastructure that will always be made available by the government free of cost. So that's my short initial response.
Thank you, Mansi. There's another question. And so as digital infrastructure is being implemented, how does one ensure the legal and regulatory framework keeps pace with the evolution of digital infrastructure? And I think this issue was there in Donghyun's presentation as well. But so do we know anything from countries' experiences where the legal and regulatory framework is changing as a result of what's happening? Who is going to respond to that? Ravina, would you?
Well, all I can say is this is a global problem. My country hasn't dealt with some of these changes and recent developments, and it's even more difficult in developing countries where you're facing big problems. I don't know if anybody's got any solutions.
I'd like to add to what Ravina said. Mansi, 1 minute.
Yeah, probably 30 seconds. I just wanted to say that she's absolutely right that, these are evolving areas of policy, and that no country has been able to figure it out. Even countries like Europe that have announced a lot of these regulatory policies are having to think through running impact assessments, and India and several other developing countries are also in the journey of living and learning how to regulate the digital economy.
So I think with this, I would like to conclude because we are over our time by 4 or 5 minutes. I would have liked to summarize the discussion, which was very rich and interesting, but it will take some more time, and I think we can't do that. But but I would like to conclude by saying that the digital technologies do offer enormous benefits to developing countries in terms of addressing poverty, in enhancing financial inclusion, enhancing labor force participation, and benefiting some of the sectors that are left out in the development process, such as agriculture. But there is no common framework which countries can use. It has to be something, as Mansi pointed out, countries would have to pick up the things which work for them. And I think we are seeing that in Africa and other parts of the world where countries are using what is suitable for them. And of course, one of the issues which Ravina made, points which Ravina made, which is that we need a national digital technology strategy, which countries must come up with. And if, and we, in the audience, people like to see legal infrastructure which is supportive of these national digital technology strategies. And of course, governments will have to remove some of the barriers which limit the use of digital technologies. Education is one, and the social barriers, which were listed very nicely by Ravina. And the issue of unequal distribution of benefits arising from AI, that issue is very much on the table, and I don't know how countries will address, because the amount of resources needed to be able to do something successfully in this area is rather large. Not only financial resources, but also resources in terms of energy that is, or it tends to be in short supply in a number of developing countries. So with this, I'd like to conclude and thank the panel for very interesting and rich discussion and taking the time for participating in this discussion. For some of you, the time zone was not ideal, but we appreciate very much your effort to join us in this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.